Hello everyone, let's go back to Alabama death row to see what these people did to deserve the capital punishment. This is part 4 of the series. Larry Wayne Whitehead, 27 years on death row. Larry Whitehead was detained and charged with a significant theft that had the possible outcome of landing him in a life sentence in jail. As a background story, Whitehead worked at a company where he would clock in and then leave, only to come back to clock out just before his shift was supposed to end. He was charged with stealing around $12,000 from this company. The officer that interviewed him and arrested him for this was Detective Andrew Whitten, and he was shot and killed so that he would not have a chance to testify against Whitehead. Whitehead is now 61 years old. Demetrius Terence Frazier, 12 years on death row. Demetrius Frazier confessed to the murder and essay of Pauline Brown while serving a life sentence in Michigan. In March 1992, Frazier was detained in Detroit, Michigan on suspicion of crimes unconnected to the Alabama case. While in the Detroit Police Department's care, Frazier admitted to robbing, and killing Miss Brown. Frazier served more than 18 years in the Michigan Department of Corrections after being found guilty in April 1993 of armed robbery, criminal sexual conduct, felony possession of firearms, and felony murder. For that, he was given a life sentence in prison. He is now 52 years old. Tony Barksdale, 26 years on death row. He was convicted for shooting and murdering 18-year-old Julie Rhodes on December 1, 1995. Barksdale, an attractive 19-year-old black male who was born and raised in the Washington, D.C. area, approached Rhodes as she was parking her car in the mall's parking lot. Barksdale was looking for a ride to take him and his two white friends, Kevin Hilburn and Jonathan David Garrison, back to their home in Guntersville, Alabama, which was about 2 hours away. But Rhodes only had a few minutes before she had to report back to work. The request for the lengthy travel was absurd. Barksdale persevered, though. The Knollwood apartments are located on the other side of town. Would she take the 3 of them there? She also didn't have time for that. How about in the middle? Eventually, she gave in. The 3 young men climbed inside her vehicle and began the short drive, which should only have taken a few minutes. Directions were given by Barksdale from the back seat. He directed Rhodes to turn right into Charlotte Lane, a cul-de-sac, after leaving the 6th Avenue extension. She stopped the car so that her 3 new pals could exit. Barksdale then pulled out a 9mm weapon. The 2 other men huddled behind the garden shed 50 feet away from Charlotte Lane as they fled into the night. The exact details of what transpired afterwards are hotly contested. The only people who saw what happened were Rhodes, who was found nearly dead later that night with 2 bullet wounds to her face and neck, and Barksdale. Rhodes survived long enough for a neighboring couple to find her and hear her exclaim, "A black man shot me." Barksdale is now 46 years old. Vernon Lamar Yancy, 26 years on death row. On March 23, 1995, Matty Pee Wee Sports, a cashier at Tyler's grocery store, was fatally shot with a sawed-off shotgun. Around 10:30 p.m. on the night of the murder, Sports and his daughter-in-law Lisa Navas were working at Tyler's shop when a client walked in. The client saw Yancy coming toward the store and then running away from it around 10 minutes later as he was leaving the parking lot of the shop. He had on a pair of blue jeans and no further clothing. A man with an orange ski mask, gloves, and a sawed-off shotgun who was wearing a raincoat entered the business around 5 minutes after the customer had departed. Sports was shot in the face from close range as the man approached her straight and leveled the shotgun at her. She died immediately. The man pursued Navas as she made an attempt to flee to the restroom and lock the door, but she was unable to do so because he caught her. He requested money from her, and Navas gave it to him from a cash register and from money stashed inside a pack of Benson & Hedges cigarettes. The man gave off the impression that he was aware that the store had more money that was shown by the cash register. Later, the store's owner stated in court that about $1,500 was stolen during the theft. The man's ski mask was loose and did not entirely conceal his face, so as Navas knelt down to get the money, she glanced up and saw a familiar face from the store. She claimed that she could see his face well and that she knew his eyes. She claimed that after that she averted her gaze out of concern that he might become aware of her recognition of him. After taking the cash, the man fled the shop. Navas, who was at that point lying on the ground next to the victim, activated the silent alarm, dialed 911, and waited for the police. Yancy is now 53 years old. Donald Brodnax, 26 years on death row. Donald Brodnax, who had been found guilty of murder in 1978 and was presently serving a 99-year prison term, lived in a work-release facility in Alexander City and worked at Welborn Forest Products there in April 1996. Brodnax married Jan Stamps in 1995. She was the grandmother of D'Angelo Stamps, who was then 3 years old. Brodnax and Jan were experiencing marital issues, and he thought Jan was primarily to blame for a recent parole denial. According to the evidence, Jan and D'Angelo delivered lunch to Brodnax at his employment on April 25, 1996, after 6 p.m. Brodnax's co-worker at Welborn and prisoner at the work-release facility, Johnny Baker, testified in court that he saw Brodnax driving Jan's car. Later that night, a couple reported a suspicious vehicle parked across the street to their house. At around 9 p.m., Birmingham Police Department officers who had responded to the call arrived at the house. They saw blood on the ground behind the parked car and on the bumper as they got closer. They promptly radioed their supervisor and the paramedics based on their observations. Then they secured the site. The automobile belonged to Jan Brodnax. When the paramedics arrived, they unlocked the trunk and discovered Jan and D'Angelo's remains inside. They had each suffered injuries. Jan and D'Angelo died from blunt force trauma, which may have been brought on by using a piece of lumber like the one discovered in the trunk with the bodies, according to Dr. Robert Brissy, the forensic pathologist who conducted the examinations on the victims. Brodnax is now 61 years old. Corey Maples, 26 years on death row. Maples was given the death penalty for shooting and murdering two of his friends, Stacy Allen Terry and Barry Dwayne Robinson, while they were in their car in front of Maples' house getting ready to leave. When he was apprehended by the police nearly a month later, he fully confessed to what he did, but he said he does not know why he did that. He just couldn't recall why he decided to kill them. He still appears on Alabama death row list, but I read that in 2022, the district court granted Maples' habeas corpus petition and directed Alabama to vacate Maples' death sentence and re-sentence him to life without the possibility of parole, or initiate proceedings for a new penalty phase hearing. This was because he did not have proper representation at his initial trial. He is now 49 years old. Taurus Carroll, 25 years on death row. He was already serving time in prison when he murdered a fellow inmate, Michael Turner. Carroll accused Turner of stealing his cell phone, according to the testimony given during the trial. Turner repeatedly denied the theft, but Carroll stabbed him many times with a prison-made blade constructed from a piece of an air conditioner vent. Turner suffered 16 stab wounds to his body, neck, and skull. He passed away in the jail hospital. Carroll allegedly admitted to a correctional guard that he did intend to kill Turner, not just hurt him. He is now 46 years old. Ortez Hammonds, 25 years on death row. Marilyn Mitchell was ready to make a cake for her mother's birthday on May 15, 1990. The 22-year-old, who had only recently graduated from college, could not have had a more promising future. With a nursing degree, she started working for Southeast Health, moved into a beautiful house in Dothan, and began planning her wedding to her high school sweetheart. Hammonds went back to Mrs. Mitchell's house after delivering furnishings to her a day or two earlier. He essayed her and viciously stabbed her 38 times. In a very short while, he had taken a shower, he smoked a cigarette, and turned the ashes over Mrs. Mitchell's body. He quietly left her Chapelwood home in broad daylight. It took the Dothan police 6 years to find him, until Hammonds was finally connected to the crime site by DNA. He is now 53 years old. Jerry Jerome Smith, 25 years on death row. On October 19, 1996, at around 8:30 p.m., a drug dealer named Smith visited Flournoy's home in Dothan to collect $1,500 that Flournoy owed him for crack cocaine. Flournoy informed Smith that while he did not have the money at the time, he would later that evening. Smith left, but his girlfriend and him returned to Flournoy's house later that evening. When they arrived, Smith was carrying a sawed-off .22 caliber rifle under his shirt. Flournoy reiterated his claim that he lacked the funds Smith was owed. Flournoy, who was unarmed, pleaded for his life, but Smith shot him in the chest. The other residents of the house were unarmed as well, so Smith then turned his weapon on them. Bennett was shot in the head while sitting in a chair, and Helms was shot 6 times in the chest as she attempted to run. Both passed away on the spot. Flournoy made an attempt to flee, but passed out in his yard. The gunshot wound to his chest ultimately caused his death. Derek Gross was the target of another attempt by Smith, but the weapon jammed. Smith tried to take a knife from his girlfriend as he and Gross struggled with the rifle, but Gross managed to get away. Smith escaped the scene after the shootings. He arranged for a friend to conceal the gun. He dressed differently and made an effort to elude the police. The following morning, however, he was taken into custody at his father's home. Smith is now 52 years old. Michael Craig Maxwell, 25 years on death row. Harold Pugh and Joey Pugh, his 11-year-old son, were reported missing to the Colbert County Sheriff's Office on July 21, 1997. A friend of the Pughs named Mike Sennett stated that he and other friends went searching for the Pughs at Cane Creek in Colbert County early on July 21st after learning of their disappearance. The Pughs were being looked for in the same region by both the local authorities and the rescue team. Sennett stated that both Harold and his son liked to fish. Sennett was the one who discovered Harold and Joey Pugh's bodies floating in the creek while making one final trip up Cane Creek in his boat before returning home. The next day's autopsies showed that each victim had received 2 headshots. 2 armed men who were dressed in dark-colored army fatigues, hooded shirts, sunglasses, and gloves robbed the Deposit Guarantee National Bank in Belmont, Mississippi on the day the victims' bodies were discovered. A bank employee testified that while he was unable to identify the men responsible for the robbery, he was able to identify the truck they fled in. The police located the truck because it was set on fire and they were led to it by the smoke. A suspect was arrested and he explained what happened. His name was Ferguson and he admitted to the police that on the day of the killings, he and the other criminals were searching for 2 vehicles to take and use in the bank robbery in Belmont. Ferguson claimed that while they were searching for a vehicle to take, Moore, Maxwell, Graham, and Risley came across the Pugh's truck parked close to the Cane Creek boat launch. According to Ferguson, Harold Pugh climbed out of the boat and into his truck when the Pugh family arrived at the landing in their boat. He claimed that Maxwell was directing the Pughs to get back into the boat while pointing a gun at them before he even realized it. Maxwell and Moore leaped into the boat before Moore gave the command for Ferguson to follow. Ferguson claimed that both Moore and Maxwell were carrying pistols. Ferguson said that he was not carrying any type of weapon. They continued downstream in the boat with the victims while Risley and Graham waited with the truck. After hearing a shot, Ferguson turned and he saw Maxwell shooting Harold Pugh. He insisted that he had no idea who shot Joey Pugh, but he did admit that Maxwell and Moore were responsible for tossing the bodies of the victims into the creek. Maxwell is now 52 years old. Gerald Taylor, 25 years on death row. Following a burglary gone wrong at Steve Dias Motors on December 12, 1997, Taylor was found guilty of triple homicide. According to prosecution testimony, he and co-defendant Kenyatta McMillan were carrying out a plot to loot the dealership when Taylor put a revolver to the heads of Steve Dias and Bruce and Sherry Gaston and fired the trigger. The prosecution's main witness, McMillan, claimed that the victims were wailing, sobbing, and pleading for their lives when Taylor killed them. Due to his testimony, McMillan was spared the death penalty and received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Taylor is now 52 years old. Thomas Dale Ferguson, 25 years on death row. We talked about him earlier in connection to Harold Pugh and Joey Pugh, his 11-year-old son, deaths caused by 4 men, among which Ferguson was. He is now 50 years old. Joseph Michael Wilson, 25 years on death row. In the fatal shootings of 4 people on September 25, 1996, and the injuring of 2 others at a residence on University Drive, Wilson was charged alongside Nicholas Acklin and another man. A prior incident in which a resident of the house informed the Madison County Sheriff's Department that Wilson had taken his cell phone preceded the shootings. The third man, Corey Johnson, who did not fire a shot, was freed from jail in 2011 after serving a 15-year sentence on a felony murder conviction. Acklin and Wilson were both convicted in 1998 and given death sentences. Wilson is now 46 years old. Anthony Tyson, 25 years on death row. Porter Key, a driver for Henry Trucking Company, came across Derek Cowan's body in the middle of the road on January 4, 1997, while traveling on Franklin Road in Macon County. Key observed a green Acura car veer off the road and crash into a fence. The vehicle then reversed into the road and accelerated toward Tuskegee. He followed the automobile because he believed the driver had been in a hit-and-run collision. He lost the car in Tuskegee because he was unable to keep up. Cowan had been shot twice in the back of the head and was not an accident victim. The body of Damian Thompson was found slumped forward in the passenger side of the Acura that was hidden in the bushes at the intersection of Bull Avenue and Anona Street in Tuskegee a short while after Key discovered Cowan's body. Thompson had received 2 headshots. 10 days after the double homicide in Macon County, police were looking into a shooting in Union Springs when they made the connection between Tyson and the killings. Nicholas Martin testified that when he was walking his dog, Tyson and 3 other individuals fired shots at him from a moving vehicle. He claimed to have recognized Tyson and to have visited the police station where he had authorized the issuance of an arrest order. The double homicide's murder weapon was the gun identified as the one used in the Union Springs killing. Tyson is now 52 years old. Chanel Andre Jackson, 25 years on death row. In the spring of 1997, 4 young males in a car cut off a second vehicle with 2 men inside in the area of Montgomery, Alabama, with the intention of robbing them. The driver of the second automobile was killed in a brief gun battle. All 4 of the guys in the first vehicle were accused of capital murder by the prosecution, but only one was given the death penalty, and that is Chanel Jackson. In the Jackson case, a 12-member jury unanimously decided in 1998 to impose a life sentence rather than the death penalty, in part because there was proof that the fatal gunshot originated from the gun of a different defendant. Judge William Gordon, however, used judicial discretion to alter the verdict to death based on aggravating circumstances. The other 3 men, who were close friends before the gunfight and who testified against Jackson, even though he hardly knew them, received shorter terms. One was given a life sentence, and the other 2 were eligible for parole in 2015 and in 2017. Jackson is now 45 years old. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.